The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time is a game that has developed quite the reputation. Even nearly 30 years after its release, it's held with this kind of reverence that you rarely see for a video game. Almost everyone who has played this game will insist that it is one of, if not, the greatest games of all time. But for me, I've never been able to see it this way. As someone who has played both the Nintendo 64 original and the remake for the 3DS, Ocarina of Time has always been that Zelda game that's just good. Recently, however, I started to ask myself a question that I'd never really thought about before. Why? What is it about Ocarina of Time that's made me feel so indifferent towards it? Is there something that I've been missing? Is it possible that it just doesn't connect with me like it has for everyone else? And that's what led me to make this video. This isn't meant to be a full retrospective of Ocarina of Time, but it's very much structured like one. This felt like the best way for me to work through all of my thoughts because, for the first time in a few years, I sat down and replayed Ocarina of Time. And honestly, it's far better than I remembered. But I still wouldn't call it perfect. One of the biggest factors that draws people to Zelda games is unquestionably the story. A good story is often the make or break point for many fans and the factor that can cement a game as an instant classic. That being said, I think the story of Ocarina of Time is just good. It's by no means a terrible story, but if I were to rank it against the stories of other games, I would probably put it somewhere in high B tier or low A tier. A lot of people have criticized Ocarina of Time's story for being almost identical to that of A Link to the Past, and to an extent, I can see where these people are coming from. When boiled down to its simplest form, both stories have a very similar structure. Link collects 3 MacGuffins to pull the Master Sword, gets transported to a new overworld that's similar to the first, completes dungeons to rescue the sages, and ultimately defeats Ganon. And while Ocarina's story is far more nuanced than just that, it still feels fundamentally simple. But that simplicity isn't necessarily a bad thing. If anything, it's part of what makes Ocarina of Time the most Zelda game. It has all the elements that fans have come to expect from these games. The Master Sword, the Triforce, Zelda, Ganondorf, etc., etc. If I had to guess, it's that simplicity that makes so many people enjoy it. With every new Zelda game having some new gameplay gimmick, sometimes people just want to go back and enjoy the series in its purest form. I think that this simplistic appeal is something that I've never truly recognized until replaying the game for this video. Having a simple story that's told in a way that's both narratively cohesive and satisfying is far better than an intricate story that jumps all over the place. It could also explain why so many people recommend Ocarina of Time as the first game someone should play to get into the series. It manages to be familiar to the games that came both before and after it. And despite my critiques, the story still works really well for what it is. It's charming, funny, upbeat, and just an overall good time. There were multiple points where I just couldn't help but crack a smile, and almost all of Sheik's dialogue was far more profound than I remembered it being. The whole game is filled with this sense of childlike wonder that I don't think I've ever fully realized until now, and that makes the tonal shift into Majora's Mask hit that much harder. But that's a topic for another video. Moving on to the characters, they're honestly a mixed bag for me. Character interactions are few and far between, and none of them really get a lot of screen time. They all felt pretty basic and didn't show a lot of personality, outside of 1 or 2 exceptions. I think that the biggest missed opportunity was a chance to get a better look at the relationship between Link and Saria. The ones that we do get are very sweet and sometimes sad, and I don't think I'm alone when I say that I would have loved to see more of that. However, I'd say that this is more of a minor nitpick than a criticism, and it definitely isn't something exclusive to Ocarina of Time. Almost all of the characters managed to stand out just enough to the point where many of them have become fan favorites, and there's nothing wrong with that. While I do think that the characters have gotten a lot better as the games have gone on, I don't think that any of the characters here are bad at all. Overall, I've come away with a much more positive view of Ocarina of Time's story. It still has its faults, and it's nowhere near the best the series has to offer, but I think I understand the appeal a lot better than I did before. That being said, I don't think that the story is the main draw of Ocarina of Time. If anything, that would be the gameplay. There's always going to be a challenge when taking a modern look at older games, and that's the issue of time. Features that were considered revolutionary when a game came out may now be considered outdated by modern standards. This was one of the biggest problems I faced while writing this script. I found that many of the gripes I had with the gameplay, as well as the rest of the game as a whole, could honestly be excused by age and the technical limitations of the time. With that out of the way, I think Ocarina of Time still plays really well in some areas, but others kind of struggle. A great example of this is the Z-targeting system. As a way to address the problem of how combat would work in a 3D environment, the developers created a system in which the camera would lock onto something of interest, be it an enemy, an NPC, etc. This system was revolutionary, and it set the standard for almost every action-adventure game that came out after it. I cannot overstate how impressive it is that Z-targeting works as well as it does despite being the first attempt at something like this. However, that doesn't mean Z-targeting is perfect. In the N64 version, which is what I played for this video using my Nintendo Switch Online subscription, targeting can be very finicky at times. This is especially true if you use the bow or slingshot against multiple enemies at once, since you'll end up just switching from first to third person aiming multiple times while just trying to change your target. There's also the fact that if your target is moving around, you'll probably miss them a few times. It makes some enemies, like Keese, a lot more annoying to deal with than they should be. Z-targeting is thankfully more fine-tuned in the 3DS version, which mitigates a lot of these problems, but it doesn't remove them outright. Speaking of the bow and the slingshot, the aiming system. I'm fairly sure that this is more of an age/controller problem, but aiming any of the ranged weapons at something without Z-targeting is incredibly clunky in the N64 version. The aiming feels incredibly slow, and it led to me missing a few shots on multiple occasions. It makes certain minigames like the shooting galleries much more annoying than they need to be. Again though, this was fixed in the 3DS version thanks to the system's much more precise gyroscopic aiming. Moving on to the puzzles, I feel like Ocarina of Time didn't really focus on them too much. This can kinda be forgiven due to it being the first game of its kind, but there are so many instances where the same type of puzzle is reused multiple times. You will see so many eye switch, silver rupee, and torch puzzles in this game, and I hesitate to count some of these as puzzles since the eye switches are more so tests of your spatial awareness. That's not to say that all of them are bad though. I liked how the silver rupee puzzles tended to evolve as you go, incorporating new elements to keep them fresh. Sometimes you'll have to use the hook shot to reach a platform, while other times you'll have to dodge stage hazards. I still would have preferred it if there were a bit less of these puzzles, but I don't think any of them are bad. The camera was also surprisingly more cooperative than I remember it being, though it did take a while to get used to. There were multiple times when it would lock onto something when I was just trying to rotate the camera to a different angle. This got mildly annoying at points, but it wasn't a big deal. The only time it really bothered me was when I was in smaller confined areas with enemies. You know, like the water temple. Another thing that Ocarina of Time is most often remembered for is its dungeons, all of which hold up really well outside of one or two exceptions. I won't go into too much detail about what I think of each dungeon, especially since I already did a 3D dungeon ranking video where I did just that. If you want to see exactly what I thought of each dungeon, as well as the rest of the 3D dungeons in the series, you should check that video out when you're done. However, I will say that after this recent playthrough, some of my opinions have shifted slightly, especially towards one dungeon. The dungeon that I found to be better than I remembered was, surprisingly, the water temple. Now, just to clarify, I have a lot more experience with the N64 version of the game than I do the 3DS version. So when I think of the water temple, I think of the N64 version specifically. Many of the complaints I had about it in my dungeon ranking video still hold to an extent. The dungeon is still fairly confusing in the original version. There's no indication as to which Triforce symbols raise and lower the water level, and it's really easy to get turned around at points. Sometimes it's not that bad, but you'll mostly need to remember which Triforce symbols do what and where they're located. Then there's the iron boots, which can only be equipped and unequipped through the pause menu. This means that you'll constantly be pausing and unpausing the game to equip and unequip the iron boots, which is just annoying and tedious. Both of the aforementioned issues are somewhat remedied in the 3DS remake, but we aren't talking about that version right now. Other than that though, the water temple wasn't as bad as I remembered it being. The puzzles weren't too confusing, and I thought some of them were pretty cool. I did get turned around once or twice, but I still managed to get through the dungeon a lot quicker than I thought I would. I think I would keep the N64 version in C tier, but I would probably put the 3DS version above it in B tier thanks to the quality of life changes that make it less tedious to navigate. As for the rest of the dungeons, I'll just rapid fire some thoughts since my opinions on them didn't change too much. The Great Deku Tree is still a great introductory dungeon. Very simplistic when compared to the first dungeons of other 3D games, but it gets a pass since it's the first one. Dodongo's Cavern was still kinda mid. Really not a whole lot going on here, and it was painfully easy, although I did like the puzzle where you had to throw the bombs into the eye sockets of the giant skull. That was cool. Jabu Jabu's Belly wasn't as confusing as I remembered it being, but that one corridor with the 3 paths and the walls that all look the same just absolutely sucks. I got turned around like at least twice. It'd probably go in C tier now though. The Forest Temple is still absolutely peak. Great atmosphere, great music, thumbs up all around. The Fire Temple is still pretty average. The atmosphere is awesome, but the loop of saving Gorons gets old real quick. The Shadow Temple is also a bit less cool than I remember it being, and it uses the hover boots a lot less than you'd think given that they're the dungeon item. Would probably move it down to A tier instead of S tier. The Spirit Temple is still awesome. The music rocks, the atmosphere rocks, and the puzzles are mildly challenging. It's probably now my second favorite dungeon in the game. Finally, Ganon's Castle is still pretty mid, but honestly, I forgot how it incorporated scrapped elements from other temples. There's the fans in the Forest Temple room, a lot more ice in the Water Temple room, and a whole section based on the scrapped Light Temple. That's pretty cool. Still a C tier dungeon though. But while all of the dungeons mostly hold up, I unfortunately can't say the same for some of the bosses. While some of them were a bit better than I remembered, a good chunk of them weren't. They were either far too easy or just really showed their age. The only one that really gets a pass here is Goma, as she's the first boss you fight. Her job is to teach the player how bosses will work in 3D, and she does that job really well. King Dodongo, on the other hand, is just so painfully easy that it's boring. He only has 2 attacks and he goes down before you can even blink. Baronade was actually a bit more difficult than I remembered. I like how you have to sever the limbs holding it in place before trying to stun it as it spins around the arena. It's also super cool that it uses Bari, the jellyfish guys, as weapons, spinning them around and making it harder for you to stun it. Phantom Ganon was also a fun fight, but the N64 version is absolutely weighed down by the fact that you have to deal with the sluggish aiming. The second phase of the fight also kinda sucks since it just becomes Dead Man's Volley. I really like the Volvagia fight, especially since it's kind of a challenge. You need to smash its head with the Megaton Hammer and avoid all the rocks that fall from the ceiling when it flies around. Also, Volvagia has such a sick design. Morpha, though, is painfully boring, and it puts the main problem I had with the Z targeting system on full display. You will constantly miss the core with your long shot since it moves up and down the arms, which can get kind of frustrating at first. But when you finally get the hang of it, there's virtually no challenge here. Morpha should have been switched with Dark Link. Bongo Bongo was also a bit more annoying than I remembered, since it was kind of hard to target his hands with the constant bouncing. However, once I equipped the hover boots, it was really easy. Twinrova was also a little more difficult than I remembered, mostly thanks to the Z targeting making it a bit hard to aim the beam at the correct sister during the first phase. But the second phase is still really solid, so they get a pass. However, the boss that I'm still really disappointed by is Ganondorf. I've complained about his fight a few times in the past, and this most recent playthrough has reinforced my dislike of it. While the atmosphere and environment are great, the fight itself is just incredibly simple. Play tennis, stun him with light arrow, and slash away. Rinse and repeat until he drops. The fight's only difficulty is the fact that you can't Z-target him, which can lead to you missing a few of your shots and just making the fight drag on. But even though this fight is still disappointing, the game more than makes up for it with the Ganon fight. While this fight is also fairly simple, it manages to be a decent challenge while also being cinematic as hell. In the N64 version, the area is dark and you're only able to make out Ganon's silhouette. The lightning in the background will flash periodically, lighting the area and letting you see Ganon better, but it only lasts for less than a second, which adds to the tense atmosphere. This whole fight is absolutely peak, and I've somehow never fully appreciated how good it is until now. Something else I've never truly appreciated until now was... Ocarina of Time's world is one that I've both praised and criticized in the past, but more so the latter than the former. While I think many aspects of this version of Hyrule still hold up really well, some places really show their age. I'll go ahead and get the big one out of the way first. Hyrule Field. I've criticized Ocarina of Time's version of Hyrule Field plenty of times before on this channel, and I'll admit, when I started playing through the game again, I was honestly expecting it to not be as bad as I remembered it being. But instead, I still found myself hating every time I had to go through it to get somewhere. I've said it once and I'll say it again. At the time, this was impressive. Having a large central area that branches off into smaller sub-areas was something that hadn't really been done before, and it made the world feel far more connected than in the previous games. My problem lies in the fact that Hyrule Field is just... boring. There is virtually nothing here. While there are a few secret grottos scattered around, they rarely have anything interesting inside them, and getting to them requires you to navigate through this barren, empty wasteland. You have to navigate through this area over and over again as a child, all while mashing the A button to make Link roll and get through it faster. Getting Epona as an adult makes traveling through it far quicker, but it just sucks for the first third of the game. But where the game struggles with Hyrule Field, it more than makes up for it with some of the other areas. Kakariko Village is small and cozy, but it has this hidden dark side that completely changes how you view the whole place. There's a reason why so many people were hesitant to go down that well in Tears of the Kingdom. Kokiri Forest is also quite possibly one of the best starting locations in a Zelda game, giving the player plenty of space to explore and learn the mechanics before sending them into the first dungeon. I still think that it holds up really well today, and it doesn't take a whole lot of time to get through, but I also think that Breath of the Wild's Great Plateau has overthrown it as the best tutorial area in the series. Goron City also feels strangely cozy to me. It feels so chill, and the music is an absolute vibe. This is also one of my favorite versions of the Gorons, since they just feel like chill guys who want to lie back and munch on their rocks all day. Zora River is one of the areas that feels the most alive in my opinion, having all these winding paths and the river being filled with Octoroks and Tektites. By following the river to its source, you'll arrive at Zora's domain, which admittedly, I'm not a huge fan of. While it somewhat has that regal feel the developers were clearly going for, it honestly feels like a secret swimming spot rather than the home of the majestic Zora. I don't think that the vibe they were going for would truly be nailed until some of the later games in the series. Castletown is also a really quaint area that feels a lot bigger than it actually is. I like how active it is during the day, with the lively, upbeat music and all the NPCs going about their business. I would have preferred that they had expanded it a bit rather than putting all of the major shops in the central area. It would have given the player the opportunity to explore a bit more, because there's virtually no point to this back alleyway section existing. It would have also been kinda cool to see Goron, Gerudo, and Zora NPCs in town, reinforcing the idea that Castletown is this major hub that everyone visits. I'm really glad that they took this approach when designing Castletown and Twilight Princess. But by far the coolest part about Ocarina of Time's world is how it all changes when Link becomes an adult. Once Ganondorf takes over, Castletown is reduced to rubble, with the Redeads infesting the streets. Death Mountain is a lot more active than before, looking as if it could erupt at any second. Kakariko Village has its peaceful facade ripped off when you visit the bottom of the well and the Shadow Temple. Zora's domain gets frozen over, which gives access to the Ice Cavern mini-dungeon. I never really appreciated these details before now, and I feel kinda stupid for that. So many elements of the world were put together with such love and care to make this new version of Hyrule that feels both similar and different from the games that came before it. And while by today's standards, many of these areas look kinda bland, I feel like there's some kind of charm that makes up for it. It's incredible to see how much video games and technology as a whole have advanced in 30 years. But while I have come to better appreciate how this version of Hyrule changes as Link travels through time, I think that the opposite has occurred for one of the game's main gimmicks, the time travel. While this would technically fall into the gameplay part of the video, I felt like it made a bit more sense to give my thoughts on Ocarina of Time's time travel mechanic its own part of the video. When someone thinks of Ocarina of Time, chances are that this is probably one of the first things that comes to mind. The idea of traveling through time to play as both the child and adult versions of the main character wasn't something that had really been explored before in media to my knowledge. It's the reason that time travel has become synonymous with the Zelda series to the point where every 3D game has some form of time manipulation in it. And for a gimmick that's become so iconic, Ocarina of Time hardly ever uses it. This has always been one of my biggest gripes with Ocarina of Time. For being one of the game's main features and biggest selling points, you are hardly ever required to go back to playing as a child once you become an adult. If you're just following the story, meaning that you're not focused on doing any of the side content, you are only required to use the game's main feature twice. Once to navigate the bottom of the well, and again for the first half of the Spirit Temple. I might be alone in this opinion, but it feels like a bit of a missed opportunity to not have it be a bigger part of the main narrative. This is one of the main reasons I think Oracle of Ages does its time travel a lot better. In that game, you use the Harp of Ages to travel back in time at multiple points throughout the story, with one dungeon even requiring you to navigate it in both the past and the present. By doing certain things in the past, you can solve puzzles and get to new areas in the present. I can only think of one instance where this is done in Ocarina of Time, which is when you get to the Spirit Temple as an adult and learn the Requiem of Spirit from Sheik, then go back to the present where you can do the first half of the Spirit Temple. I really think more dungeons should have leaned into this gimmick, or maybe just some of the puzzles in general. But with all of those complaints out of the way, I think that this can partially be forgiven due to the technical limitations. A system like that of Oracle of Ages would have worked a lot better, but it also would have been much harder to pull off seamlessly. That's not to say that it couldn't be done though. I think that Ocarina of Time had the potential to really focus on the time aspect. The foundations for a story that focuses more on one of the game's main selling points are there. I just think that the main story of a game about traveling through time would require the player to do so more than twice. And again, this is excluding any side quests or collectibles. In a lot of ways, I think this feeling of ideas that are so close to being perfect applies to my feelings towards Ocarina of Time as a whole. Some ideas were never truly given the chance to flourish due to several limitations outside of the developer's control, whether technical, financial, or simply a lack of time. But in some cases, a lack of time can lead to the creation of something truly special. But that's a story for another day. For now, let's wrap this up. As I said at the beginning of this video, Ocarina of Time has always been a game that I've found good, but nowhere near the masterpiece that everyone claims it to be. Having played it again, however, I think I kind of get it now. I've always understood that Ocarina of Time is special, but I think I can truly see the extent now. Ocarina of Time is a game that managed to both set and surpass all standards. It tweaked and perfected the formula introduced in A Link to the Past while laying the groundwork for all 3D Zelda games, as well as every 3D adventure game that followed it. While each new 3D Zelda would introduce a gimmick that would be met with differing responses from fans, there's something strangely charming about visiting a game that doesn't have any of that. It's also just impressive how much of the game still holds up almost 30 years later. Ocarina of Time was a groundbreaking experiment that took so many risks while having nothing to go on. It's just incredible how much was done right on the first try, and that's made me develop a far stronger opinion and appreciation for it. Ocarina of Time was the first attempt. While it got plenty right, there were still multiple areas where it could be improved. That's where the other 3D games stepped up. Each one is an adjustment of the format that Ocarina of Time established. While some stuck close to that original blueprint and others took bold departures from it, they all still have Ocarina of Time to thank for laying the foundation. The game is nowhere near perfect. While I can forgive some flaws as side effects of age or limitations, others show how much future games have improved over it. But to say that these flaws make Ocarina of Time a bad game is shamefully ignorant. Ocarina of Time is nowhere near my favorite game, let alone my favorite Zelda game. Hell, I think now I'd put it at the number 10 spot on my ranking at the absolute highest. But it is the one that I respect the most for bringing both the Zelda series and video games as a whole to where they are today. It may not have been a game from my childhood, and I may never be able to fully appreciate it like those who grew up with it. But if replaying this game has taught me anything, it's that you're never too old to see the magic of this game. And as the cruel flow of time marches on, exposing the cracks and flaws, Ocarina of Time will forever remain timeless. And with that, I want to thank you all for watching. I appreciate you guys for being so patient with me, and I'll try not to take as long on the next video. Thank you all so much for 10,000 subscribers. It's genuinely insane to me that so many people actually want to watch my stuff and listen to what I have to say, and I want to keep going just for as long as I can. If you want to help us reach the next milestone, which is the big 15K, then be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to let the algorithm know that I'm doing a good job. Thank you once again for watching, never forget your courage, and I'll see you guys in the next one.